finding that role in those difficult situations. Because I hear what you're saying too on the young man you've described. That, and I wasn't there, so I didn't see what happened, but it sounds unusual. The way you've described it sounds pretty unusual to me. So I understand that. I certainly do.
Thank you, Mr. Stout.
I just will weigh in and say, in no way is my vote saying that I don't believe SRO shouldn't be in the building, and this is not anything against Bellevue. It's a bigger issue for me. We've had this conversations as it goes to the workshop. I mean, I think, in my opinion, it's a little premature. We are setting up our Student Code of Conduct Committee. Matt Ray asked board members to be a part of that. We are going to have people from the community a part of that, and we're going to redo this entire Student Code of Conduct or make a lot of changes to it. And I think that's part of the problem. When I read this contract, I always go back to the disorderly conduct, and that could mean so many things to so many people criminally, and that's what a lot of kids get cited for, not just in OPS, but wherever they are. And I remember a report of, in 3 months, there were 300 kids with citations at schools, and I don't think it was just OPS, but it's a bigger issue that we're criminalizing kids way too early, and we're often putting them in a system that I believe is broken, that just makes somewhat kids worse than what they are, harder in terms of what people say than what they are. So for me, this is just a fundamental vote at this point of, if this was a one-year contract, I would feel a little better. But without knowing what the Student Code of Conduct is going to look like in a year, I can't make a 3-year commitment, because the Student Code of Conduct may have recommendations in it that say, here are ticketable offenses in Omaha Public Schools. It may not, but this contract does not give us the flexibility to get out of that if our Student Code of Conduct and our committee decides there's other recommendations. So for me, it's a length time. I do understand there's a need to have them there, but until we resolve this bigger issue, I can't support a 3-year term contract at this time. So that's my personal opinion on it, of why I will be voting no. Ms. Williams.
I want to agree to disagree. I don't think it's premature to have this discussion about SROs in the building. I think the sooner that we have the conversation, I think that that lends to something. I mean, we're trying to figure out what is, from a policy perspective, what is acceptable and what do we want them to do. And I understand the Student Code of Conduct Committee. However, I think we still need to have that conversation. I don't think it's premature by any means. If anything, it almost should be done in conjunction, because one very much has everything to do with the other. And that's why that conversation needs to happen sooner than later. I understand the timing. I mean, I think that would be easier to digest if it was a 1 year, so that we could get through that. But I also don't see how we could have them in and there's no contract. That's just how I feel.
Any other discussion? And then let me just clarify, I think the committee should have that conversation and come from the committee. If the board wants to have a workshop, it takes 2 board members for us to put something together on the agenda. We have no problem doing that. Having an extra meeting right now for the next 2 months is going to be very difficult for me. People can read into that what they want, but I'll be at a lot of PTA meetings. With that, any other discussions? Mr. Snow.
Thank you, Mr. President. My discussion with Ms. Fay, we wanted to know if we could vote. The question is, could we vote to amend the contract? Is that a possibility, or is that a no? I mean, that would probably have to come from Megan.
So you can vote to amend the contract, but then it would be my charge to go back to them, and then if they say that's okay, then great. If they say no, that's not okay, then I'll have to bring it back to you guys again. Yes.
It's gonna go. What is our current contract with Omaha?
I don't have it in front of me, and I haven't looked at it prior to this meeting.
Like the expiration date part.
I believe that the current contract with Omaha will expire with respect to the SROs, in another year and a half or so. With the ASROs, we only have a 1-year agreement with them because of some issues related to the Affordable Care Act. Those guys and the amount of time they spend on that. I would note one other thing. There is a third political subdivision that we deal with. Davis actually is outside the city school limits, and so we have a contract with the Douglas County Sheriff. That one we're in year 2, and that should be either at the end of this year or at the end of next year. That'll be done. Omaha's was renewed a year ago, so I think we're another year away on the SRO side. But the ASRO is coming up, will be done at the end of this year.
And since we're kind of just talking about it, because it's not going to change my vote even if we shorten it because there's a bigger issue, but I fundamentally have a problem with OPS paying 50% of it. I mean, these are many towns in the state of Nebraska, and if something happens at one of our schools, you would think somebody should be there anyway. I mean, just that's a whole other issue, but I just thought I'd put that on the record. People are looking at me because in other cities and other districts, they usually pay 25% to a third and not 50%. So just throw that out there. Ms. Williams.
I guess with that, I do agree with you as far as the pay, and I do, but I think that lends itself to the workshop to be able to figure out what does that look like. But I think we should also be considering there's contracts that are coming due a year and a half. So if this one is a year, why aren't they all kind of running together? Why aren't they due around the same time so that we can look at all of the schools? Because what if there's an alternative option? Now we can only do this group of schools because I mean, I think those are things that would be prevalent to have a board workshop and to have these conversations. I mean, we've spent quite a bit of time this evening, so I'm sure that a workshop would be able to fuel all of our questions and really start to make progress. But regardless of how busy our schedules are, the safety of our students should be first and foremost. And I don't care how much stuff we have on our plate. This is not a conversation that we should put off. We're talking about the safety and security of our students. And I think that parents would want more information up front. I know I as a parent want that information. I don't want it to be put off, and I don't want to wait, because this is our job, is to make sure that our students are safe and they're secure, and this is a part of that. The money and all of that comes with the conversation, but we have to think about our students first.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion or we'll move on.
I move to approve the school resource officer contract with Bellevue.
Second.
There's a motion on the floor by Mrs. Godding to approve the resource officer's contract with Bellevue, between Bellevue and Omaha Public Schools. That is before us. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Fay. Any more discussion? Mr. Scanlon.
I guess I'm of the opinion that we'd rather shorten the contract length, since there are issues that people have with the SRO and everything. Instead of making it a 3-year contract, I'd prefer to amend it to a 1-year contract, and then that way we're not locked in. We have the ability to discuss the role of the SRO, and we have some flexibility for this school year moving forward with the contract and the language. So I guess my preference would be to reduce the overall time.
There's an amendment to reducing the contract. I guess it'll be 2.2 to read the second sentence to, instead of ending in July 31st, 2017, it would be reflected to end July 31st, 2015. And I believe that's the only other place in the contract. Either Mrs. Godding and Mrs. Fay, are you willing to accept that amendment? If not, I'll have to take a second and vote on the amendment.
I have a question, and maybe she's headed up here.
So the amendment needs a second. So the motion and a second. Then you have to vote on the amendment, and then you have to vote on the amended contract.
If both parties agree to it, do I still have to? We changed our bylaws to say we roughly follow or loosely follow Robert Rules of Order. So is there a second to the amendment?
I'll second the amendment.
Is there any more discussion on the amendment? Ms. America?
As this may be a procedural type question, but because if we approve the change it to a 1-year contract, then we have to go back to Bellevue. Do we know or have any loose idea of what the timeline would be of them getting back to us on that? They're shaking their heads no. I am not comfortable doing that unless I know we have something saying we will still have the resource officers that are currently in our schools, and that they're not going to say, since you're not doing this contract and making us re-reviewing them, we're pulling our services from the 2 schools in Sarpy County.
So I have no idea how soon they could get back to us, but I do know they are just like a political subdivision, just like all of you, and so you have to meet in order for you to vote on something, and so it would have to be at their next regularly scheduled meeting, and I don't recall when that is. I didn't have that discussion.
There's an amendment on the floor to reduce the 3-year term to a 1-year term. Any more discussion? Mrs. Fay?
Could you just, because it was early in the discussion, could you just review one more time what it would take to get out of the contract if, you mentioned that earlier, that there was.
So there is no termination provision in the current contract. It does say that you can amend the contract by mutual agreement. So if the parties were to decide and agree to amend it, they could. That doesn't mean that you couldn't be locked. I mean, there is a possibility that you could be locked in it for 3 years. There is a possibility that you could get out of it. And without having a discussion with them, I'm not going to be able to give you any indication as to what their board's willing to do. And they may need to have a discussion at the board meeting and then get back to me, and then they may need to vote on it. I don't know with regard to negotiations with the contractor or where that would be at. I couldn't give you any definitive answer. It's kind of up in there. It could be anything, really.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any more discussion? We are voting on the amendment to reduce the contract language from 2017 on 2.1 to be July 31st, 2015, 1-year contract. Any more discussion? Hearing Mr. Snow.
I would be inclined to vote for a 1-year contract. But the same argument I had earlier still stands. We need to have a discussion about this, and not a discussion in action, because I think we've talked too much about it instead of actually saying, what are we going to do? Let's do it now. And too many kids. That was that thing, having kids still under this current system, and not actually having some full scope on what school's doing what principal's implementing what, how the new principals understanding this role of the SRO, and how's the district communicating, and how's the police department communicating that between each other. But I feel like I said my piece. No one's listening.
Any more discussion? Ms. America, sorry.
It's okay, Justin. I love technology. The Bellevue City Council appears to be the body that would be approving that. And they do have an item on their agenda for their next meeting this upcoming Monday of approving the renewal of the Civil Resource Officer MOU. So if we did want to change it, they do have that on their agenda already for Monday to discuss.
Any more discussion? We are still on the amendment to strike the language of 2017, turn it to July 31st, 2015, to remove the contract from a 3-year contract to a 1-year contract. Any more discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
America,
Yes.
Scanlon,
Aye.
Snow,
Yes.
Underwood,
Aye.
Vargas,
Aye.
Wayne,
No.
Williams,
Aye.
Fay,
Aye.
Aye.
Goding, 8 aye.
Motion carries. Now, be back before us is the agreement with the amended language of July 31st, 2015. Any more discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Scanlon,
Aye.
Snow,
Aye.
Underwood,
Aye.
Vargas,
Aye.
Wayne,
Abstain.
Williams,
Aye.
Fay,
Aye.
Goding,
Aye.
America.
Aye.
8 aye, 1 abstention.
Motion carries.
I move that the Board of Education go into closed session for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals, to discuss with the superintendent, secretary to the board, and legal counsel, legal advice, and potential litigation.
There's a motion on the floor by Mrs. Gowdy to go into closed session. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Williams. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Snow,
Aye.
Underwood,
Aye.
Vargas,
Aye.
Wayne,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Fay,
Aye.
Goding,
Aye.
America,
Aye.
Scanlon,
Aye.
9 aye.
Motion carries. Let me remind the board that the purpose of closed session is for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals, to discuss with the superintendent, secretary of the board, and legal counsel, legal advice, and potential litigation. Let the record reflect the board went into closed session at 9:49 p.m.